Welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast, where we set aside time to have engaging conversation. I had to swallow halfway through.
Yeah, man. Just take a deep breath before, so you're gonna.
Okay. Welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast, where we set aside time to have engaging conversations on relevant topics related to behavior analysis. I'm Zachary Bird.
And I'm Caleb Davis. Zach.
Here we are.
We're here, and guess what?
What?
This is the last episode of season 2.
What?
That's
wow, already. Wow. How do you feel about this season?
I like it. I think that we talked about how to translate research to practice, which I think you and I feel really strongly about.
Yeah.
And all the guests we had on this season, I thought were great to interview, and I certainly learned a lot from talking to them. And I think they shared like some really helpful information and with our listeners. So I think it was good.
Yeah, me too. I think it was great. I think we are set up for this grand finale today. What are we going to talk about?
Yeah, I like how you said grand finale because our topic to cap off season 2 is probably not what people would expect when we say the words grand finale, because we're actually going to be talking about a topic that has been around for a long time and is, I'm sure, very familiar to our listeners. So,
okay.
do you want to say what it is, Zach?
Okay. Preference assessments.
Preference assessments?
Yeah, preference assessments.
Yeah, how much of a, I don't know. I just feel like it's so anticlimactic.
Is anybody going to download this episode? They're going to see preference assessments and they're going to be like, well, that's kind of weird. I'm not going to listen to that.
Yeah, well, that would be a mistake.
Those people aren't listening right now.
That's true. The only people listening are the ones that made the brave decision to listen to a podcast, a new podcast about preference assessments. So we should probably tell people why it's worth listening to.
Okay. Yeah. So, I think one of the things is that we have this understanding. The research on preference assessments has been for like how long? 1985? Maybe PACE, single stimulus preference assessment?
That's right. Single stimulus preference assessment in 1985, so that's over 3.5 decades ago.
Whoa.
Things were rolling in the preference assessment literature, right? And so just to put that in perspective, so we're talking about a topic today that one of these initial seminal studies was first published in the year that the original Nintendo was released.
Ooh, like
I'm talking like Duck Hunt.
Duck Hunt. Yeah. All right. Oh man, I remember my sister would. She was younger than me, and so I would be trying to tell her that she's going to shoot the gun. She has to sit back on the couch because she would go up to the TV and smash the gun right into our glass TV, and I'm like, you're going to break our TV.
Oh, yeah. When you're playing that game, you have to have clear guidelines about what's going to be an acceptable distance and stuff. So it's an even playing field.
That's right. I agree 100%.
But yeah, 1985, original Nintendo, single stimulus preference assessment was published. Then Fisher 1992. I'm sure most of our listeners are aware of that.
Yeah. So 1992, what happened then? Let me see here. Oh my goodness. Honey, I Blew Up the Kids came out.
Okay. Is that different than...
You're not impressed by that?
No.
It was a great...
I don't even know that movie. I know Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which is a classic.
Oh,
but is that different? Is that like the sequel?
Yeah, it's the sequel.
Okay, yeah, I never saw that.
I don't know. I'm sure okay, well, that's not as exciting as I thought. But that's what happened in 1992. I guess, Honey, I Blew Up the Kids. Well, there you go.
But also the paired stimulus preference assessment.
Oh, well, actually, that's way better. The paired stimulus preference assessment is much more of a, I think a pop culture event than Honey, I Blew Up the Kids. Don't you think?
I mean, yeah, if it was Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, I don't know. It might be a little bit more of a debate, but I think certainly Honey, I Blew Up the Kids. I would say, yeah, definitely paired stimulus, bigger pop culture moment.
Yeah.
But no, and okay, so those are like two well-known studies, I think. Most people learn about those in grad school. And then another one that I think is probably worth talking about as we kind of take this walk through time about preference assessments would be De Leon 1996, which, as most people know, this is when the study on the MSWO was published.
Yeah. Very valuable.
Yeah. And so what was happening in life, in
All right,
culture?
I'll let you guess, okay? Are you ready? Listen. Okay, just listen for a second. If you want to be my lover, gonna go with my friend.
So it's Spice Girls.
Yeah.
Spice Girls.
All right.
What were they up to in 1996?
They released that song that you just heard. That rendition.
Okay.
Wannabe. They released that song in 1996. So I actually put that above the MSWO as far as pop culture relevance, but in behavior analysis, I don't think Wannabe goes very far. And the MSWO does, I think, go much further.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think, so these three studies we mentioned, they're certainly not all of the big articles in preference assessment literature. But I think certainly, at least for me, I'm assuming you as well, Zach, they're kind of like the big ones that like immediately pop out as like these, seminal articles in the preference assessment literature.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're, again, over or close to 3 decades ago, these were published. And so I think what's great about our field is that there's always more questions, and people have been continuing to do this research on preference assessments throughout time.
Of course.
So, Spice Girls, they broke up, or did they break up, or I don't know how it worked.
No idea.
How it ended, but preference assessment research has continued through it all, which is pretty cool. So I think what we're hoping to talk about today is, where are we at now? What are like some of the more recent advancements in preference assessments? What have we learned, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
So what type of preference assessments, because I think you and I are a little bit in tune with some of these advancements, but what do you think are like the cool things that have been happening in recent years as far as preference assessments? I'm sure there's multiple things, but what's something that you find is interesting?
Yeah, well, so I think that additional work on kind of the free operant preference assessment is important. I think it's also important. We have a colleague who has been working on attention preference assessments. I think it kind of brings it to a new level, and that's important. We have a lot of preference assessment sort of literature that we focus a lot on toys and edibles, and I think using attention adds some complexity and adds some additional tool to our skill set as it relates to identifying preference and reinforcers.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, so attention preference assessments, that's kind of interesting. I'm like aware that those studies have been happening.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But to be honest, like when I was in grad school, I don't really remember reading any of those specifically. You know what I mean? It's almost like I know that they're happening. I know people are doing some work in that area, but I don't know like in depth all like the procedural variations and stuff like that. Presumably there's like some considerations around like assessing attention, just because it seems like it would be different than like the typical preference assessments in some ways, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think probably some of the research has come out since we've gotten our BCBA. So I got mine in 2013, I think. And so I know some of the literature is coming out after grad school. So maybe that's why some of it wasn't covered. So I think it's a good refresher, and it'll be good to jump in depth on it as a topic today. Yeah.
Right. I guess that's why we offer continuing education for this, because things change. Even after you get your BCBA, there's always new cool studies popping out. So
yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So I think let's get somebody on here that can answer some of our questions about assessing preference for different types of attention. I'm looking forward to this. I'm not a topic I know a ton about, so I think
this is great.
Should be good. All right.
Let's go find someone.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Dr. Casey Clay, welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast. How's it going today?
It's going well, Caleb. It's good to be here with you and Zach.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, this is great. Today, we're talking about attention preference assessments, which is something that you published on and know quite a bit about. So I think the big question I have is, what is attention preference assessment?
Well, it's similar to preference assessments we're all familiar with.
Casey Clay is the director of behavior clinics at the Thompson Autism Center at Children's Hospital of Orange County.
And, I typically refer to it as a social interaction preference assessment. I think that's sort of some new terminology in the sense that social interactions might involve some reciprocation or some back and forth. Whereas attention might just be, you're delivering something at somebody. And
right.
So yeah, a social interaction preference assessment is similar to other preference assessments in the sense that we are assessing the preferred value of stimuli, and those stimuli look like typical interactions that you might have with any client you're working with. And we identify what's preferred and non-preferred, and then, use them as putative reinforcers.
Cool. Yeah. So can you give us some examples of the types of interactions that might be put into the preference assessment?
Yeah. So they're basically the things that you would do when you're working with clients: tickles, high fives, head rubs. If they're little clients, sometimes picking them up and doing like a rocket ship thing is fun.
Yeah. Cool.
Like physical interactions.
Yeah. So there could be that physical component can be part of it. It could just be something you're saying. Could be even a conversation topic. That someone might like.
I have kind of a follow-up question. I know we haven't gotten too far into this, but so would you add something like statements of disapproval? From the functional analysis literature, or reprimands or something like that? Would you add that in too?
Hey, that's a great point, Zach. I think that many times we overlook those stimuli as potentially reinforcing. And so, you could throw that in there. A kid might like that. We've actually done something where you might say, "You little rascal," or something like that, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So it's sort of like a statement of disapproval, but at the same time, that kiddo might like that.
Yeah, that's good.
So, Casey, some of our listeners right now might be thinking, like, that's cool, you can do a preference assessment with attention, but why can't I just ask somebody? Like, why do I actually need to do the assessment? Maybe I just know what the client that I work with, what they like, just from what I know about them, my interactions already with them. How would you respond to that?
That's a great question. I think that many times verbal abilities are fairly low in the populations we work with, so they might not be able to respond. Also, I think, individuals as self-reporters of things they like, I think we've seen in especially preference assessment literature, is that what people say they like and what actually comes out as highly preferred or even reinforcing might be different. So, I think you could ask your clients, what they might like, but, you might not get that kind of correspondence when you actually go to deliver that as a potential reinforcer. And also, I think a really important point is that if we do a preference assessment, we're actually picking the interactions that we're including in the preference assessment. So we might be able to pick something novel that the person hasn't had experience with. So if
that's a good point.
So if you're asking them, they might not provide that just because they're not aware of it.
They might not be like, "Yeah, say you little rascal."
Yeah, exactly. They might not tell you that reprimands are something that they like.
Right. No, I mean, that actually makes a ton of sense.
So that's a good point. So pretty similar to any other type of preference assessment with tangible items, you might throw in some new cool toys that a kid's never played with. you could do the same with attention. You might throw in some novel social or some sort of interaction that maybe they never encountered, but they might actually like once they experience it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you can really leverage what type of stimuli you have available to you, and that, your staff might be delivering, or anybody that's in a caregiving situation with that client. You really can identify something that will work for you and might be new for them that they would like.
I think now it might be helpful, Casey, if we could walk through some of the research that's been done on these social interaction preference assessments.
Yeah, wow. So there's quite a bit. So behavior analysts have been including social interactions or forms of attention in preference assessments for a while now. However, I would say it hasn't been until the past 10 years or so that we've exclusively only included social interactions within the preference assessment. Okay. There are examples of preference assessments early on in the literature that might have included a high five, but then also had M&Ms and different toys and things in it. But yeah, just up until recently, we've only started including social interactions. And, it's interesting. The inclusion of social interactions has kind of followed the same pattern as preference assessment literature when that was first coming out, in the sense that what's the format in which we deliver these social interactions? Is it a paired stimulus format? Or is it, a single operant arrangement? Or is it multiple stimuli available at once? So, I think that including social interactions into preference assessments kind of follow those different types of formats. But basically what we've seen is that you can identify high quality forms of social interaction. You can identify low quality forms of social interactions. High quality forms of social interactions do serve as more potent reinforcers than lower quality forms of social interaction. There's also more recently been research has included preference assessments with individuals with autism, in the sense that, autism spectrum disorder, one of the definitions of it is that they demonstrate social deficits. And so identifying preferred forms of social interactions to use with individuals with autism has been something that there's been quite a bit of attention lately in research.
Oh, interesting. Maybe you could send along some of the references you have, and we'll throw them into the show notes for anybody who's interested in delving into that literature.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Casey, can you talk a little bit about what like a preference assessment actually looks like when you're conducting it? Because, you mentioned these different formats of conducting preference assessments, which I think we're all familiar with, like single operant, paired stimulus. But attention, that's not really like a tangible item. It's not like you can line up different forms of attention. It's very, you know what I mean? So how do you go about doing that? Like, how would you present options of different forms of attention when, it's not like edible preference assessment where you can line up an M&M, a cookie, and, a chip or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great point. Like you said, there not only are different formats of preference assessments, there's different modalities in the sense of how we're representing different forms of social interactions. So some research that my colleagues and I did, we specifically did what I like to call an in vivo social interaction preference assessment. Okay. And it's a paired stimulus format. And what it looks like is basically there's a square area, or you're in a small room, and you can divide the room up either with a divider or a piece of tape. And then you have two therapists on either side of that divider or piece of tape. And then you have the client or the participant sort of in line with that divider or perpendicular to that divider. And then what you do is you would first give the client experience with those social interactions. So you might direct them to one side of the divider or the line, and then that therapist might deliver hugs. Then you bring the client back to kind of a neutral position, and then you take them to the other side of the divider or the line, and that therapist might deliver tickles. And then you'd come back, right? And then you'd say, okay, pick one.
Nice.
And then you're recording the selections via an in vivo arrangement where you actually have the therapist there. Now, that's one modality that we can use when we're doing social interactive preference assessments. Other research has included videos, so taking a video clip of the social interaction. Yeah, and maybe even looping that video clip and then presenting that either in a paired arrangement or MSWO arrangement. And actually, recent research including GIF files that demonstrate the forms of social interaction that you can present. Some studies, it really, as simple as presenting a picture of, somebody giving another person a high five and presenting pictures available for selection. Or even more recently, there's been arbitrary stimuli that you might pair with a different form of social interaction, such as a picture of a star on a card. And if the participant or the client selects that star, then you deliver a specific form of interaction. Then you might have a different card that's a circle, right? And then they select that. And then they might, get a different social interaction. So there are a lot of different ways I think you can represent social interactions to make them more easily included in a preference assessment.
So there's definitely a bunch of different options. A question that pops into my mind, Casey, is depending on the learner, it seems like you might have to go with one option or another depending on like skill sets, right? Because like I've certainly worked with some learners that if you presented pictures, they're probably not going to engage in discriminated responding because maybe they don't have some prerequisite skills. What are your thoughts on that? Like, are there certain like skills that people need to have and that sort of directs you into what modality to use?
Yeah, definitely. And I think when I first got started in this, the individuals I was working with maybe had lower levels of a verbal repertoire. So what we did was specifically have an in vivo preference assessment where the therapists were representing, that social interaction. But, one way that you could actually identify that skill repertoire ahead of time is to test it. You can see if they have object to picture matching correspondence. And some researchers have done this specifically in studies where they use, for example, a video preference assessment.
That's smart.
They specifically test the participants ahead of time to see if they can match a video to an object or a video to an interaction, and that correspondence is available.
Yeah, it's smart.
So, Casey, people might be thinking, why should behavior analysts use this? How are we going to use this in real life?
That's a great question. I think this is very valuable in the sense that we don't typically assess the quality of the types of interaction that we're delivering to clients or students. One thing, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, is individuals with autism. Many people would suggest that, social interactions or attention don't function as reinforcers for them. So I think it's valuable to identify some forms of attention or social interactions that they might prefer and indeed might serve as reinforcers. I think we know, however, that, that many times that is the case, that an individual diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder does still prefer specific social stimuli. And so we should be identifying the highest preferred options for them and include them into their daily lives.
Nice. I guess it also makes sense if someone were to run into a situation where people aren't feeling super comfortable providing edibles in a situation as a reinforcer. So that might even boost the value of something like this even more. Have you had experience with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great point. Frequently, we turn to edibles as reinforcers, and usually we're using the edibles that are the good ones, that are the sugary ones,
Right.
that are the ones that are not so healthy for us. And, this might be an option to sort of complement those reinforcers. I don't think I'd say, you have to eliminate edibles entirely. But, if you include more social interactions as reinforcers into behavior programs, then, that might be a little bit of a healthier option for our clients. And, also they're highly available in the sense that
Right.
If you have edibles, you got to lug them around in something. Toys, you got to lug them around. The toy is going to get lost. However, social interaction is sort of always available
Right.
and is also cheap for that matter.
Yes, free hugs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it really kind of sounds like you're really speaking to the ecological validity of these stimuli, right? So Yeah, definitely seems valuable given that I would say a lot of our behavior is probably maintained by some form of social interaction in many cases. So I think, if our clients, if we can identify social interactions that function as reinforcers for our clients, it may be more likely that their behavior is going to contact that reinforcement or something similar to it in the natural environment, which I think is probably the goal of a lot of practitioners, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think you really hit the nail on the generalization head there. The fact
that's what I was going for.
The fact that so much of our lives involve social interactions. Those reinforcers are available in other settings, and it's actually great if we can program in the sense that we're training multiple exemplars, so different types of interactions, for the likelihood that they come in contact in the natural environment with those stimuli.
Something I've thought about related to this is kind of like if we use only toys and edibles as our reinforcers, we're setting up folks who have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder to not value attention as much as they could. So like this is already an area of deficit. Well, what about that relationship building? I think that that's an important piece. And I think that creates a lot of value for something like this.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think making those stimuli available in their environment and in some way even conditioning them as more powerful reinforcers just through more preferred situations. I think that if you were to limit those and take a lot of those interactions out, or simply put the label on an individual that, they don't respond to social interactions, then you are in essence affecting their environment in the sense that people won't be delivering a lot of social interactions with them. And then, that's fairly limiting what stimuli are available.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, like if they have this label like, they don't really care about people. I've heard this before. They don't really care about people.
Yeah.
It's like, that's why we have to use food and we have to use toys because they don't really care about people. And it's like, well, yeah, but like they probably would if you did it right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I think that's great rationale for assessing preference in the sense that you find a high quality social interaction. It is very likely the case that they don't like a lot of social interactions or might find them aversive. However, there is going to be some that are more preferred than others, and making use of those and keeping them in the environment is very critical, I'd say, for that individual's repertoire and just the type of things they're exposed to in their life.
Great point.
Casey, I'm assuming since you've done so many of these types of assessments, have you come across like really idiosyncratic sort of types of attention that kids have liked? Like I just imagine, kids with autism oftentimes have like these really kind of interesting interests. So I'm wondering, like, have you found like really interesting types of attention that you've discovered through doing these assessments?
Oh, that's interesting. I'm thinking back of some of the different things that different social interactions I've assessed, and like we were talking about earlier, kind of the disapproval, the social disapproval is something that usually makes a lot of people smile when you're doing a preference assessment, like saying you little rascal, and kind of pointing at them, and the kids grinning and really enjoying that. But there's other things like there's one social interaction I call noodle arms, and that's where you take their hands in your hands and you just wiggle their arms, sort of like those ropes at the gym. You obviously don't have to do that very gently, but the noodle arms has been kind of a fun one that's been preferred.
Aren't those called? Are those battle ropes,
kiddos.
Caleb? You'd know this better than me. Are they called battle ropes or something like that?
Oh, I don't know what they're called. I don't know what they're called.
I was going to say we could
call them battle ropes in a preference assessment.
I was going to call them battle arms.
Battle arms.
Do you want hugs or battle arms?
Oh man, that sounds like we could get into potentially risky situations. We're assessing that.
Yeah, I think noodle arms is a safe name. You guys went with the safe name on that, I think.
Casey, so In season 2, we're focusing on research to practice. So one of the things that we're hoping to offer to anyone who's listening to this season is some sort of resource to help them out. So they might think, oh, I'm really interested in starting to use social interaction preference assessments in my practice, but I don't really know where to start. Do you have any resources that could help them along the path toward using this in practice?
Yeah, definitely. I've given multiple conference talks actually, so I definitely have some PowerPoint slides that I'd be willing to share.
Great.
And maybe even there's a specific slide deck that's tailored more specifically to instructions for how to do preference assessments that I've specifically done research on. Also, I'd be willing to share some data sheets, and that might help your listeners.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, we'll throw those on our website, and people can just download them freely available. Thank you so much, Casey. That's really kind.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, but if you're a BCBA or a BCABA and you're interested in getting a CE for listening to this episode, you can purchase it at functionalrelationspodcast.com. This episode is worth 1 learning CE, and you'll need to provide 2 code words when you go to check out. The first code word for this episode is sticker. 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 If you use the potty every time today and you don't have any accidents, you can get a sticker.
So obviously, we've talked about what these preference assessments look like, but are there problems that you run into? Like, are there common issues that if somebody's running one of these preference assessments through social interaction that they might run into? And do you have any sort of advice on like how to handle things that pop up?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, when I first started getting into this, we were using therapists in vivo, and we had lots of different therapists helping us with the research project. And that can be fairly staff intensive. So that can be a problem. Another thing is the participants or the clients might specifically like a form of attention only delivered by a specific therapist. So, what we did in an early study was we did what we called a tracking test, where the therapist that was associated with the highest preferred stimulus and the therapist that was associated with the lowest preferred switched and then delivered those social interactions to see if the participants would track the form of interaction over the therapist, because sometimes you see that participants or clients only like that specific therapist. Also, I think, adding discriminative stimuli can be helpful in the sense that individuals might not have enough experience with a specific social interaction. So you might actually put therapists in different colored shirts, and then that might help them discriminate which social interaction is coming from which therapist based on those descriptive stimuli.
Oh yeah, that seems helpful. So that would be like if the issue pops up that it doesn't seem like your client is discriminating, and that's why maybe you're not seeing a clear indication of preference, you could like throw in some additional things like you just mentioned.
Yeah, definitely discriminative stimuli. And also something I failed to mention is a control stimulus. I think adding in a control stimulus in a preference assessment, and many times we don't have a control stimulus in a lot of the preference assessments we do, so something that you're fairly sure they're not going to select. If we're doing a paired stimulus preference assessment, and we have therapists on both sides of a divider, the control stimulus might actually be not having a therapist present on one side of that divider, right? And then measuring,
so like just going and being by yourself, right? Like would be the control.
Yeah, exactly. Just going and being by yourself, or even throwing something in that's just like not you wouldn't think they like that much, like just a simple, oh, hi, how are you? Or like, hey, good to see you today, type of thing we might say.
Good morning.
Would work as a control. That's pretty hard trying to piece that out. I think what might serve as a control stimulus in the sense that they're not getting the same stimulation as they are from the other test interactions, for example.
Like, here's your math worksheet.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know if that's actually maybe an example of something that would create like a social negative, and they might want to escape from it.
Yeah.
So,
But that actually does make a good point. You wouldn't want something aversive, because then you could get avoidance responding and not preference for the thing on the other side.
yes.
Right. It's like anything but that.
Yeah.
Anything but math.
I'll take battle arms over math.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a rock between a rock and a hard place right there.
Yeah.
Either math or battle arms.
Yeah. Good point.
Sometimes there are some really small things that matter with protocols that we run. Are there minor details that might be overlooked, but also important to pay attention to related to social interaction preference assessments?
Yeah, something that, I've come across is it's valuable to have staff practice beforehand. For example, if you are doing an in vivo social interaction preference assessment, kind of have the staff demonstrate what they're going to do and practice and role play with them, so that when you do bring the kiddo in, you can make sure that form of attention they're delivering consistently, and, it doesn't feel awkward and is, as natural as possible.
You want to be good at noodle arms if you're the person who's going to do it. You know what I mean? You don't want crappy noodle arms.
No, exactly. And if you're going to do a tracking test, which I would recommend that you do that social interaction across multiple therapists, you want them all to practice, because some people are better at noodle arms than others. Some people treat it like battle arms, and some people do maybe just really a wet noodle arm.
Yeah, that would be interesting, actually, if you found that, like, maybe there's a certain therapist that, for whatever reason, like, enhances the value of certain social interactions that might lead to other questions, like, why? Like, why did they prefer it from this person? Like, what about that history? So that maybe other people could try to replicate that to increase, their social interaction, like the value of theirs.
That's a great point, Caleb. And it actually makes me think about a second study that we conducted in 2017, where what we found in the first preference assessment, or in conducting social interaction preference assessments, was that some people delivered social interactions a little bit different, in the sense that they might provide some physical contact, right? And the kiddo might like the physical touch, and others are, get really close to an individual. So the study we did was specifically piecing out the different components of a social interaction. There's likely a vocal component. There's also likely going to be a physical component. And then assessing those separately to see, if we could develop a hierarchy of what's preferred, or maybe what combination is preferred.
Oh yeah, that's smart. So kind of like you guys did like a component analysis then, pretty much, of just like the different aspects of the interaction.
Yeah, definitely. I think you could call that out. Try and piece out different components that are part of a social interaction, and then do a component analysis and see which one might be more preferred or more reinforcing than the others.
Nice. So Casey, this has been super helpful. I think going through, the different formats and considerations around conducting these types of assessments. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel like is important to add here as we're finishing this up?
Yeah, I think something that's fairly important is the application of social interaction preference assessments in decreasing problem behavior and assessment and treatment of problem behavior, in the sense that, we frequently, for example, in functional analyses, we assess preference for tangibles, we assess preference for demands, or, doing a demand assessment. But we don't frequently assess preference for attention. And it might be the case, that we want to identify the highest quality attention there to see if they're behavior sensitive to that. And then, once we've identified a high quality and a low quality form of attention, it might be the case that during intervention, we deliver the low quality form of attention if a person's problem behavior is sensitive to attention, in the sense that we wouldn't have to use extinction. So for cases in which extinction might be dangerous, we'd be able to deliver a low quality form of attention instead of actually delivering or instead of actually putting extinction in place.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, because I'm a firm believer of, I don't think we can really ever place like attention maintained problem behavior fully on extinction, just because, especially with like if you're dealing with more like dangerous behavior, some level of attention is going to be provided, like for safety reasons. I think generally that's the case. But I do see the value in what you're saying, Casey, in the sense that if we know what like their highest preferred attention is versus their lowest, maybe we can design procedures, to keep people safe while, hopefully still withholding the things that, really are valuable.
Yeah, exactly. Being able to identify a higher quality versus a lower quality, and then delivering that lower quality might not be as valuable or reinforcing as that higher quality attention. So I definitely see your point that extinction is not possible in situations, especially trying to withhold all forms of attention following problem behavior.
Welcome back, Caleb.
We're back.
Here we are. So this is the time in the episode that we've decided to set aside time to show our appreciation for all the people who support us.
We wanted to take a little bit of an opportunity to say thank you to everybody. We really do appreciate it.
I've even noticed a few extra people this last month are leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or giving us the stars. We appreciate those stars. We have a pretty good rating, Caleb. It's 4.9 out of 5.
Oh, that's not bad. I mean,
really good.
It's not the best, but it's pretty good, I guess.
Well, we're not the best, but we're pretty
not
good.
Perfect. We're certainly not
that's
perfect.
true. Yeah, that's right. And, if people want to comment on our Facebook or Instagram posts, feel free to do that. And if you need anything, please email us at functionalrelationspodcast@gmail.com.
If anyone's interested in supporting us in more tangible ways, certainly feel free to check out our Patreon page for more details on how you can do that.
Yeah. I'm getting ready to get another blooper reel out, Caleb. This is going to be something that I can get time to do. And we also have talked about a few little bonus episodes maybe now between now and season 3. So this will be cool. Patreon is a website that allows listeners to access behind the scenes posts, those blooper reels or updates about our seasons as they go. And we also send out small gifts to members to show our appreciation. They also can get discounts from our merch store. That merch store is still open, Caleb, and our Patreon members have access to discounted items. So that's fun too.
You can learn more about becoming a Patreon member at www.patreon.com/functionalrelationspodcast. We'll leave a link in the show notes. So if you're interested, go ahead and check that out.
Yeah, thanks again for everyone who supports us. We couldn't do it without you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's discuss our interview with Dr. Casey Clay.
Yeah, Zach, did you learn anything new about preference assessments?
Well, let's see. I did learn new things, and I also got to think more about things I already knew, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does kind of make sense. I know what you're talking about. Like, it's a topic that maybe, we've thought a lot about in the past, right? Like most people do probably as you're studying to be a BCBA, like in practice and stuff like that. But then actually coming back and like thinking critically again about preference assessment methodology. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think I just mean that I have thought enough about them here. I've known about social interaction preference assessments, but I've thought enough about them during our time on this episode that I think I know better how to utilize them and when they're most valuable.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think from talking to Casey, I could see the value in doing them before, but I think I'm more convinced of that now, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. That makes sense. I think one of the big things was, I think you asked the question, like, don't we already know what people like? There are clients, we're really close to them, we've been working with them for a while maybe, and like, don't we already know what they like, or doesn't their parents know what they like? And the response was, yeah, maybe, but maybe people aren't great at self-report, or maybe exposing them to new types of attention is really valuable. And I thought that was a really good point. I think exposure is a really important piece of this.
Yeah, Zach, I'm really glad you brought up the exposure point, because when that came up in our interview with Casey, I was actually thinking, and it kind of took me back to some of the original like preference assessment literature, where like, I think it was like Pace et al. 1985, they exposed individuals to a bunch of different stimuli, and those stimuli were ones that maybe they hadn't contacted before, I think. And then also the stimuli were kind of samples of different classes of stimuli. So what I mean by that is like, it'd be like edible stimuli. It might be like tactile stimuli. It might be stimuli related to different temperatures like heat and cold. Or also, I think they even included some sort of like interactive stimuli. So
like visual, auditory, those sorts of things.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a sampling and exposure to like these different stimuli. So when you think about like interaction and assessing preference for interaction, it would make sense that you probably do something similar to like what those original tangible items stimuli, right?
That's a great point. I like that. Yeah, I mean, you have these different classes of attention, right? In fact, you think about, and I think we talked about this a little bit, but I think we can expand upon it. It's like someone can deliver attention. Maybe they deliver attention that functions as a punisher when they say, hey, stop doing that, right? Maybe they deliver something that functions as attention that functions as a reinforcer, which is like, oh, hey, great job. Like, I really appreciate that, blah, blah, blah. Those are both attention, but one situation it's a punisher, one situation it's a reinforcer. So we have to get more of a fine-grained analysis of what we're talking about if we just talk about attention. Like having a very general idea of attention is, I think we can do better than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same can be said for tangible items too, right? Like just because tangibles function as a reinforcer, it's like, well, which ones?
Yeah, right. Broccoli and chocolate. Yes.
I actually like both of those, but
I do too, actually.
Bad example.
I like chocolate better. Yeah. Celery. I hate celery. Okay.
Fair. Yeah. Celery's, yeah.
And beets. I don't like beets. So anyway, enough about beets and celery. I was thinking about reprimands because I've found that over time, we might put reprimands in a functional analysis and we find that it is a reinforcer. And I thought that using a social interaction preference assessment, we could do better than reprimands in the sense that we could identify types of attention or social interaction that are more powerful than reprimands as a like when we find out that a reprimand functions as a reinforcer, this puts us in a weird spot because what do you do? Like, Caleb, what do you do if you find that reprimands function as a reinforcer?
Oh, boy. So the thought that comes to my mind if I was in that situation, I think would be probably very similar to what Casey provided as an example. And I'm not just taking that out of the fact that he used this as an example, like the you little rascal, but I've certainly known kids in the past that like you joke around with them in a way that made it sound like you were kind of scolding them, like in an appropriate way of like, like, hey, cut it out. Yeah. And like, but they would know, like it would be in a joking tone and they would just get like a kick out of it. Never included it in a preference assessment, but I think like informally you kind of got the sense that it probably functioned as a reinforcer for like, they would recruit that kind of attention and things like that.
Yeah. I like that idea. I think that's good. I think it really also opens up the opportunity for us to use a preference assessment like this to expose to a variety of different types of attention. And we can put the reprimand in there because then we can, if you're using a paired stimulus, you can actually see where it ranks on your types of attention. Like, I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think knowing where different types of attention sort of fall on like a spectrum of preference, and probably that's like indicative of reinforcing efficacy.
Yeah, right.
So where I think this is extremely valuable, not just like using reinforcement for like appropriate behavior. And I know we touched on this in the episode, but I think it's worth reiterating because knowing the spectrum is important, not just for the high preference, but for the low preference, right? So
Yeah.
this, I don't know if this is like a hot take or not. So I think oftentimes when when we're developing like reactive strategies for problem behavior, oftentimes, and I've certainly done this, you kind of are like, I want to eliminate any source of potential reinforcement. And so you're like,
Yeah.
don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And that might include like, don't provide any attention at all, right?
Right.
But like we talked about in the episode, like that's maybe not always possible, but also maybe it's not necessary, right? Like maybe people don't need to withhold all attention if we know because we did some form of assessment that some stimuli may just be neutral. They may not actually reinforce problem behavior. So people might not need to have to unnecessarily withhold all these forms of attention.
Yeah, like people talk about like eye contact, and maybe, if your favorite celebrity, your A-list celebrity made eye contact with you, maybe it functions as some sort of reinforcer or whatever. But the reality is maybe eye contact and like all this stuff that we do to make sure we avoid, maybe it doesn't matter. And so maybe we should just do a more fine-grained analysis of our attention instead of just saying like, provide no attention ever. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I think that also ties into what Casey was saying, where like they did an analysis of like what aspect of attention is a reinforcer. So for instance,
right,
I'm just making this up, but like, let's say you determine that actually it's physical interaction is what functions as a reinforcer. It's not verbal attention or directives. You could have potentially reactive strategies where you're just withholding physical attention, but you could still be providing some instructions, knowing that those likely don't function as a reinforcer. So again, I'm just making up a scenario, but you could imagine that would be valuable, where it's like, you don't have to withhold all, you don't have to withhold everything. We know that this individual cares a lot about if you're interacting physically with them, so we're going to not do that, or to little extent possible. I don't know.
Or
so I feel like that's
teach a way to get the physical interaction in different ways and withhold it when problem behavior occurs. Yeah,
really use it in. I think of this as being valuable where you're really trying to create the strongest differential reinforcement contingencies that you can. And it maybe in some cases it's difficult, right? Because I think we touched on severe problem behavior. You can't withhold all attention. So you really may need to look and be like, I got to do something. Let me make sure I'm providing the best attention for appropriate behavior. And I'm only doing the bare minimum for safety or whatnot for problem behavior.
Exactly.
So you wouldn't know that without an analysis, right?
That's right.
Hey everyone, if you've been listening to this whole episode and you're interested in getting a learning CE, the second and final code word is bulb. B-U-L-B. The light went out. I realized I needed a new bulb. B-U-L-B. When you finish the episode, head on over to functionalrelationspodcast.com to purchase your learning CE. And also, if you're someone that's in need of ethics CEs, you can get 2 ethics CEs for any of our episodes from season 1.
Yeah, that just speaks to just using our experimental methods better in our field, right? The more we can get into using our assessment methods that are direct and experimental, that just speaks to using our methods that we already know how to do, just doing it with everything instead of just some of the things.
Yeah, it's like same method, same process, it's just different stimuli. It's a different class of stimuli. What's cool about the research and just our science in general is just there's always new applications to like the same sort of experimental methodology, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Before we close this episode out, I wanted to talk about the social validity aspect. We touched on it in the episode, but I think it's important to point out. So I've had over the last probably, I would say maybe like 5 years, I've had more and more people come up to me and talk about how they prefer not using edibles as reinforcers. And so I've really changed the way I practice. I think going through grad school, it was like common that we would use these, but over time, I've really noticed that it's not a very socially, sometimes it is, I think, but other times it's not as socially valid as we want to be as clinicians. And so I've noticed, I'm really happy that we've had this opportunity to talk about attention in this way, because I think it's a much more socially appropriate form or like a class of reinforcers to use out in the world. What do you think?
I agree with that. I think that, to your point, right, like edibles, I kind of think about as like, if we really got to do it, like if nothing more appropriate works or functions as a reinforcer, then maybe that's what we need to look into. But I think that the methods that Casey was talking about and like that other researchers have demonstrated, they allow the possibility of identifying potential reinforcers where maybe otherwise we would have ruled out, right? Like maybe it's like, oh, it doesn't seem that attention really functions like that potent of a reinforcer. We got to use tangible items. But it's like, whoa, maybe we just need to try to throw a couple more options in there and do a more formal assessment and rule that out before we do something not necessarily that's needed or something that's maybe not as acceptable as, like you're saying, Zach, like that attention might be.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Well, Caleb, I think we've done it. I think we made it through season 2. That's it. Can you believe it?
It's exciting. It's been a good season. I can't pick a favorite between season 1 and season 2, but I think season 2's right up there.
It's right up there with season 1.
Yeah, they're maybe like they're both on the top.
They're both our favorite.
Yeah.
It's like, you can't pick a favorite child. You can't pick a favorite season.
Yeah, they're both our favorites in, unique ways, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to hear if you have any feedback about season 2. And as always, you can get a Learning CE for this episode. You can purchase it at www.functionalrelationspodcast.com. And it's one Learning CE for this episode.
Thanks a lot, Zach. This has been a good episode, Caleb, and a great season.
Yeah, great wrap up for season 2. Thank you, Caleb. This has been excellent. And for all you listeners, thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate you. And we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks a lot. Bye, Caleb.
Bye, Zach.